right, so our next presenter is Sharon Ashworth with the K-State Research and Extension Master Gardeners. She's going to teach us how to add native plants to our landscapes, which I think fits in nicely with the first presentation.
There we are. Hello, everybody. What I'm going to be talking about today is landscaping with natives. So first up, I'm going to share my screen, and it's going to be a pre-recorded video. This is the first time I've been experimenting with my phone, so please excuse it's a little rough, but I'll take you through a few slides, then some videos of some gardens, and then we'll have time for questions afterward, and I'll have a bunch of resources for you also, and I'll show you some good websites for some information. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Find it. Let's see. Okay, I don't know, let's see, can anybody see that yet?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, sharing screen, it's not coming up on my screen to share computer sound. And I have the, there it is, there we go. Okay.
Okay, I'm seeing that.
Okay, here we go.
County Master Gardeners. Today I will be talking about incorporating native plants into your landscape. So I have a few slides to share with you about natives, and then I have some videos. I'll have a video of my yard and how I've attempted to incorporate natives into traditional landscapes for a shady lawn, and then we'll talk to some of the master gardeners in our demonstration gardens about some of their favorite native plants. Let's start by defining what a native plant is. The two plants that you see on the right, the purple liatris, the gay feather, and the white penstemon, are both native to Kansas, meaning they evolved with the unique set of conditions that we have here in Kansas. The rainfall, the soils, the climate, the insects and diseases that we have all evolved together. And so these two plants can be found naturally in Kansas. They were not brought over with the Europeans. They weren't introduced by human hands. Now, the distinction here is the gay feather, Liatris aspera, is native to eastern Kansas, meaning you generally would not find it in western Kansas unless somebody deliberately brought it out to western Kansas and planted it. Consequently, it might actually struggle to live in western Kansas because it did not evolve with the conditions, particularly the much drier conditions out in western Kansas. And the same is true of the white penstemon. It is native to western Kansas, and it might struggle here under the conditions in northeast Kansas. Now, the plant on the far left is a foxtail, and it was actually introduced, and it has become naturalized, which means you typically find it. It doesn't need human help to spread. It grows very well here, but it did not originate here. It did not evolve in Kansas. So why do we plant natives? Well, the first thing that comes to many people's minds is that we plant natives for our native pollinators. Now, monarchs and honeybees are very important, and we all love them, but there are so many more pollinators. There are hundreds of native bee species, plus moths, other butterflies, beetles, birds. So we plant our native plants to support our native pollinators. We also plant natives because they are low maintenance. Being adapted to our local conditions of precipitation and heat and cold in our soils, our diseases and pests, means that these plants are heat and drought tolerant. They are tolerant of our often poor soils. They are pest resistant and disease resistant, all of which means they require less water, no fertilizer, and no pesticides. Planting a variety of native plants will bring a variety of native pollinators, so plant flowers of different forms, colors, and bloom times. Now we'll take a look at my front yard, which is more of an experiment than a designed landscape. I'm trying to incorporate a few more natives into some very, very traditional shady landscape plants for the city of Lawrence. It's a bit of a rough transition to the video, so I apologize. I'm going to go through what I am trying to grow. Now, this might not look like a cohesive theme in my yard, but it's more of an experiment in growing in the shade. So, for instance, I have this right-of-way here that is highly erodible, and I've had a lot of difficulty getting things to grow. This patch here is actually a volunteer of some kind of solidago, a goldenrod. I'm not sure of the species yet, but I will be able to key this out later when it blooms. What has been successful is this little native here called Pachyra obovata. It's groundsel, roundleaf groundsel. And this does really well. It grows up to about a height of a foot and is a bright yellow spot in the shade. And I'm really pleased with that, so I bought a whole flat of it, hoping it will spread here. Another thing I'm trying in this right-of-way is a sedum. And I'll move over here and show you what that's doing. It's actually spreading quite well here. And it's beautiful little succulent leaves and beautiful white flowers here, which it's doing quite well. So I've got both these things in here. I planted, here's a new little of the groundsel I've planted. I've planted them scattered throughout. So I've got the sedum and the groundsel, and we'll just see who wins. Or if maybe they'll both survive in this right-of-way. It's a really tough spot. It's very wet, it's very shady. The other thing that sort of volunteers here that I'm decided to let stay are these carices, the sedges. And I've decided to go ahead and let them stay because they're doing quite well. Now, I know one of them that's here, this carex right here, is Carex alba. I can't say it's the loveliest thing, but it's mowable, and I happen to just like sedges, so those grow well. There's another sedge here that I find a little finer and a little more attractive, but I haven't figured out what this one is yet. This is what my front lawn looks like now after removing any of the remaining grass. Now, most of this vinca was here before we moved in, so it's just had a time to spread. So that's what is traditionally a ground cover and shade, is the vinca, commonly called periwinkle. And that's what this is here. And it's got pretty blue flowers. There's a flower right here. But it's taken several years to get this thick. And I've seen some really nice stands of it in other shady lawns, but it took a while to get to this point. Now, this other purple flower that's in here, this one right here, is a juga, or bugleweed. And I've done something interesting with that over on the other side that I'll show you in a moment. So what else I've got growing in here that will handle the shade is the wild columbine that stands up above this carpet of vinca, this wild columbine. It's nice and pretty. It's a different color, but I do have to warn you that it does sort of pop up randomly. Once you plant it, it will just pop up wherever it sees fit. And so sometimes you might want to thin that or pull it out from places where you no longer want it. Over here, this pretty flower is a woodland phlox, Phlox divaricata. And that actually is also volunteering after I planted 1 or 2 plants of this. But I really don't mind that popping up. It's not as aggressive as the wild columbine. And I like to see that spreading in the lawn. This right here is wild ginger. This is a native. The phlox is also a native. So wild columbine, the phlox, and then this wild ginger here. These are all natives. The vinca and the bugleweed are not. This wild ginger has taken over in some lawns and can be a nice filler, nice good ground cover, can even be aggressive in some instances. But in my yard, it really hasn't taken off. I had hoped it would do better, but it seems to just hang out in this small patch, and that's the extent of it. Another plant I have in here that's native, but I find a bit too aggressive for my taste, is spiderwort or Tradescantia. It's not blooming yet, but this plant here, it has beautiful purple blossoms, and it is lovely. It is a native. It is easy to grow. It grows in the shade, but it does spread. And it's easy to pull, but it keeps coming back. So you can see there's some spreading of it through the yard. And so I tend not to recommend that unless you want it to start covering more of your yard. And then, of course, I have the traditional hostas around the bottom of my oak tree here that I've mulched around. Another native, and I have coming up over here, is Solomon seal. And that's not quite blooming yet, but it's a lovely little woodland plant. Adds some height. It's nice to mix in with the hostas. And it's got little white blossoms that will hang down from there. And so that is Solomon seal. A non-native and very, very popular ground cover, in addition to the vinca and the ajuga, the bugleweed, is the liriope. And I have planted quite a bit in here. Here's the new growth coming up for this summer. And as you can see, it forms quite a thick carpet. Here it's mixed in with the vinca. So if you're looking for something that you don't want to mow and gives you some height, well, it's about 4 to 6 inches off the ground. It's got beautiful spike flowers when it blooms, but it can be aggressive. Right now it's sort of, it tends to creep in the edge. I've used it because it works. It grows in the shade. I don't have to water it. The same with the ajuga and the vinca. They're pretty easy to care for, but they're pretty typical, pretty common, not too exciting, but they all flower beautifully, all in the blue-purple family of colors, and they do work in dry shade. So, but I have at least been able to show you a few things that are native if you want to go native. So the phlox, the wild columbine, and the wild ginger. Moving over to the other side where I've taken out the grass, I have planted a large patch of the bugleweed, the ajuga. And I showed that to you on the other side. So here's another close-up of that flower and that plant. And it's done quite nicely over here. I have quite the carpet, and it can be quite stunning when the sun hits it nice, certain parts of the morning, and beautiful purple flowers, and it's done quite nicely here. I've had to fill in a few holes here and there, but I prefer this, even though it's not native, but it does well, and I prefer it over having to mow the grass. It's a lot prettier, and I do see bumblebees enjoying this. what I've done over here is I've tried that wild ginger again. I've put it in a circle around my dogwood here. I've got a flowering dogwood here, Cornus floridus. And I've got a little patch of wild ginger that I'm hoping will spread. It looks healthy and green. It's not gotten much bigger since I planted it, or not spread much since I planted it, but I'm happy to have it here. And when that flowers, the flower is really understated, but very interesting. And here's one right here, the flower of the wild ginger. So, which is just something different and very subtle. Something that's volunteered in my yard in the wet area. This is something I'm going to be renovating over here and trying to figure out things that can handle the more wet shade where my sump pump dumps out. As you can see over here is mayapple. And I did not plant this, it's just a volunteer. But I want to show you this lovely flower on the mayapple. So I really enjoy having these little woodland plants in my front yard. So I have a shady little woodland yard that I can enjoy in the city and not have to worry about trying to keep grass alive. Now we are going to roughly transition to the demonstration gardens maintained by the Douglas County Extension Master Gardeners at the Douglas County Fairgrounds. First, I'm here with Marguerite Johnson, who is going to talk about these blooming snapdragons right here that aren't native but are an excellent complement to any pollinator garden.
I like to incorporate non-native plants with my native garden because some of them are host plants, and the snapdragon in particular is a host plant for the buckeye. She lays her eggs in there. The bumblebees go into the flowers. Beautiful colors. I mean, you know, what more can you ask in a garden?
We have an herb garden, and in that herb garden, while it's not a culinary herb, it's just a nice addition to just about any spot in your garden. I'm here with Master Gardener Sharon Davis, who's going to tell us a little bit about this plant right here.
This is one of the cultivars of the butterfly milkweed. It's an essential plant for monarch butterflies. It's one of the plants they will lay their eggs on, and it provides food for the larvae, the caterpillars. It's an easy to grow plant. It doesn't mind hot, dry weather. It blooms for several weeks, and it's slow to spread, but it will spread. Butterflies, bees, all insects love the bloom, and it's a nice bright orange color. It's a good addition anywhere in your garden.
Here at the Medicinal Garden, the KU Medicinal Garden, where the Master Gardeners have a demonstration area. And I am with Master Gardener Gretchen Beyer, who's going to talk about some of her favorite plants from the prairie to put in your home landscape.
Hi, it's early June, and these are examples of flowers that you would see early late in spring, early just before summer. One of them that I particularly like is this pale purple, pale pink coneflower that's called pallida. It's a little different than the regular echinacea because it's much more delicate. It has a narrower leaf as well. Another one that is very striking is this penstemon that blooms profusely in late May and early June with these really pretty kind of bell-shaped flowers that bumblebees love to crawl inside of. So those are two of them that I really like a lot.
Continuing at the Native Medicinal Garden, we have Master Gardener Margie Dick here to talk about another favorite right here.
And this is a rose verbena. It is a low standing native plant that is obviously sun loving and drought resistant. It does spread, but it's not invasive. It looks like it's just perfect for a rock garden. We have it in a bunch of beds out here.
To invite everyone to visit the Douglas County Fairgrounds Demonstration Garden and our other gardens. You can find the locations of our 5 demonstration gardens online. I will provide a link so that you can get maps and see what we have at our demonstration gardens. The one I'm filming here is our pollinator garden. And I'm recommending this since this is a talk about planting natives in your landscape. You can find quite a mix of natives and annuals, native perennials, and some just like the snapdragon that complement the natives in a garden. We have lots of signage so that you can take a picture of the plant and its sign and try it in your garden. So please come visit us at our gardens. Master gardeners are happy to chat with people who visit the gardens and can tell you all about the plants and how to care for them. And it's also just a nice place to sit. Find a shady morning and come sit in one of our gardens. And thank you.
Okay, so that was just a brief tour. I'm sorry about the volume on a couple of those. Oh, oops, hold on. That was YouTube. That was the next YouTube. So I'm going to try this screen share again, if I can find my way back, and see if I can't show you some other resources here for planting natives before we get to questions. So let me try this again. First of all, let's see, I don't know why I can never get back to the Google from this, but I can show this. We are putting together a publication. So the Douglas County Extension, along with Grassland Heritage and the Kansas Rural Center, are putting together a publication for planting natives in Northeast Kansas. This will be out later this summer, and we have 5 sections for native plants. We have a gardening with native plants. We have a guide for planting larger landscapes of native plants, still gardens, and we'll also have some guides to prairie restoration for those who have are tired of mowing that big lawn or have that back 40, that old brome pasture. We'll have a prairie reconstruction and a prairie restoration guide also coming out later this summer. Let me try to share another resource here. In that guide, there will be a list. So this is just an Excel file of our list. It'll be nicely put together in the publications, but we'll have a list of natives for Northeast Kansas. Not only will we have this list of species that you can look at, but also we'll have where you can go get them. We'll have a resource page for mail order or local businesses that sell natives. So that will be part of the guide as well. Let's see, one more thing. If I could get this to go to Google, I could maybe, So our website for Douglas County, if you want to find our demonstration gardens, you can go to our douglas.kstate.edu, the lawn and garden page. And down here on the left is a link to our demonstration gardens, which will give you a map and describe what's there for our demonstration gardens. So we have 2 in Lawrence, one out by the airport, the Prairie Moon School, which is the KU Medicinal Garden. We have a demonstration garden in Baldwin and one in Eudora. So, and also another resource I want to point out, if you're interested in finding any plant and how to grow it and information on any plant, a real handy tool is actually the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder. So I've got this link that you can find, Missouri, just type in Missouri Botanical Garden and Plant Finder, that will come up, and you can type in a name or you can search by what kind of environment you're trying to put a plant into. So you can put in plant type. Our zone here is 6. So, and you can put in whether you want a ground cover, whether you want shade, whether you want an ornamental grass, an annual, you can type that in. What your criteria are, if you want to spend a lot of time maintaining it, if you want a low maintenance plant, here's all the criteria, whether you want something that's flowering, whether you have a bunch of clay soil you need to deal with, whether you're dealing with shade or sun, and it'll pop up with a bunch of suggestions for you. And that's a real handy thing to use. And you can also narrow it down by natives. A lot of the Missouri natives can also complement natives here in Kansas, particularly if you're dealing with shade. We do like to borrow from Missouri for that. Okay, let's see. So now I'll just leave some time for questions.
It looks like, okay, so our first question is kind of a two-parter. They're saying, how do I get rid of English ivy, and what type of clover can I use as fescue replacement?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of that.
Oh, how do I get rid of English ivy?
English, are you getting rid of, there are a couple methods. So you can either use non-chemical means or chemical means. And often if you call our garden hotline, and that'll be on the resource page, we often recommend both options. So with the English ivy, you can continually pull it. You can also try to put black plastic over it and sort of bake it out of the soil. If you're able to do that, if it's in a real shady spot, that might be a little hard to do. With a lot of the aggressive vines, if you're looking for a quick way to get rid of it, you pull it, you cut it, and right where at the base where it hits, when you've got a little bit of that stem right at the soil line there, if you dot that with a little glyphosate, that's the active ingredient in the popular product Roundup. That will also take care of it quickly. Otherwise, you will continually be pulling at it. And that is a way to wear it down, is if you pull it over seasons, if you don't want to use the chemicals. Or if you were looking for a quicker method, you just dot that base of that stem with some glyphosate.
And our next question, any links to grow an old-fashioned clover lawn?
The clover lawn. That is a popular lawn substitute. And I know there's actually, you can see a lot of clover lawns throughout Lawrence these days. It seems to have been a good year. You'll want the low-growing clover. There's a number of seed sources. I don't have anything off the top of my head, a particular source of seed for that. It's usually a mail order thing. You could check the local garden centers and see if they have some clover. I know actually the Feed and Seed up on 6th Street, they actually have some smaller bags of clover if you just need to do a lawn. They do have the Dutch white clover. It does get a little it's mowable. The bees love it. It does get a little ratty towards the end of the summer here. Things are turning brown. I've planted it in my lawn. It usually works best if you plant that as a mix with grass seed. So you're going to help the pollinators. It's going to be a healthier for the soil to have the clover there. But it is best aesthetically to mix that with grass seed.
And just in our last couple minutes, is there a place in town to get native plants?
Yes, a number of our local stores, most of the garden centers will have some native plants. So, and the hardware stores also will have some native plants. There's traditionally things like purple coneflower, the Asclepias tuberosa, actually, that's the orange one. There was the video, the sound was really bad. That's a popular one. You can find milkweeds. So there's a smaller set of plants that you can find at any of our garden centers. If you're looking for greater numbers and more variety of native plants, Vinland Valley has a lot of native plants. There's Henry's Plant Farm. Some of the larger stores will have a few more natives. And there's also mail order. There's a couple places that specialize in native plants. Happy Apples Farms out in Tonganoxie has a great deal of natives. And then in the spring, If you watch the Monarch Watch, Grassland Heritage, and the Master Gardeners all have native plant sales. We just finished ours. And so that is a great source to get some really unusual and a wide variety of native plants, is from the native plant sales that you can watch for each spring.
And we are coming up on time, but we do have one more question. I have a problem with the taller native plants moving into the front of my bed where they shade the smaller plants. Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I imagine what happens with some of the native plants, if you don't quite have enough sun, because they're really adapted to the sunny locations. And oftentimes when you plant natives in a very well-tended garden bed, and maybe there's a little shade there, they will try to move to where the sun is. And they also tend to, if there's a little too much shade for their preference, they'll get a little bit taller. And also, if you've got good soil there and they're not used to good soil, you've got a nice tended garden, they tend to get taller and toppy. So you do have to watch that with the taller natives. And I would go with trying to replace them with shorter natives and ones that will tolerate a little bit more shade than the ones that are expecting 6 to 8 hours of bright sunshine. And so that's probably why they're migrating to the front. So I would actually try to put them in a different location, a nice sunny location, or take them out of that spot there and replace them with some shorter growing native plants.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And call the Master Gardener hotline if you have any of your gardening questions, and we have a group of Master Gardeners that are ready to help.